What is up, everybody? So it's actually been a minute since I made a phone video review like this, and this is actually a phone that I've never owned before, and I don't think I've ever seen one up until I bought one in real life, and that phone is the Moto Z Force. Now I want to say something, there's the Moto Z Force and then there's also like a Moto Z or regular edition, and I would say if it's between the Moto Z Force and the regular edition, 100% go for the Moto Z Force. This thing is much better than the Moto Z like regular version for many different reasons, and if I'm being honest, these phones really aren't that expensive anymore either, and that might sway my opinion later on when I do tell whether it's worth it or not. But let's just kind of run over this phone and see how it's been like using it for the last couple of days, and basically just explaining my thought process behind it. Now looking around the body, I would say this is one of probably the weakest points of it. If I was looking at this phone from the back, I would say that this phone is like 100% like a 10 out of 10. It looks super sick. I think one of the main problems about the back though is like the camera does protrude a little bit, but that does kind of make sense later on. I mean, for the Moto mods and everything, that really was it wasn't a failure, but it really didn't have an impact in the market. So in terms of everything for like the back, I think it looks super sick. The glass, the magnetic strip, like the metal magnetic dots on the bottom to help secure the Moto mods, I think that's actually kind of a nice touch and I do like it. But at the same time, the camera does protrude, and I understand that helps attach the Moto mods, but I'm not really a fan of it. And looking on the sides of the phone, you have nothing on the left side, but on the right side you do have the power button and the volume buttons, and I am not a fan of the volume buttons at all. I really think the power button should have been on the opposite side of the volume buttons. And on top of that, the power button and the volume buttons are like almost the exact same size. I think they are the exact same size. The power button is more rigid or whatever, but that still doesn't, change the fact that they're almost the same buttons. And I got them confused like all the time, so it was kind of confusing in that sense. But I mean, I can get over in like 20 seconds. I'm not gonna cry about it. I've already cried about it, but whatever. Now this is a phone where I have to spend so much time talking about the body because they really they dropped the ball completely. If you look at the front of this phone, it literally looks like the Moto G4, like the Moto G5. I have no idea why they put such humongous bezels on the front of this phone. They have huge ones on the top, huge ones on the side, kind of, and huge one on the bottom. Now keep in mind, this phone came out in 2016, but if I was looking at this phone, I would assume it came out in like 2012 or 2013, even though it does have a 5.5 inch 1440p screen. I just think that the body is one of the weakest aspects of this phone. From the back, it looks sick, but from the front, it looks like a budget phone. I don't know why they did it like this. And if you compare this front of the screen to something like the Google Pixel XL2 or like the Galaxy S9 or something, I don't understand why they did it like this. I mean, they could have spent a little bit more time into developing the outer exterior of this phone, but like, what are you gonna do? You can't go back in time and fix it. But if you even think about it, this is the same company that made the Moto X Pure, which was super awesome in terms of the body, and they made the Nexus 6. So why did they not go back in time and try to like fix up the design a little bit? I have no idea. I will never understand, but that's basically my take on the whole entire body issue. This phone definitely did not hold up in the body department. Now, like I said, it does have a 5.5 inch 1440p AMOLED screen, and that is definitely one of the biggest and most strongest aspects of this phone. Anytime there's AMOLED on the screen, really does up in the value of the phone, and I really like that about this phone. Now this phone specifically does have Shatterproof Screen. I don't really want to test it. It does have quite a few scratches on it, I'll be honest, but this phone technically won't crack or anything, so that's kind of cool. Or maybe it won't shatter. I'm not really too sure about the technology, but just know it does have shatterproof protection. Now turning on this phone, I do have a kind of a small problem with it, is that it got released with Android 6.0.1 Marshmallow, and it is right now upgradable to Android Nougat, which is 7.1.1, and it was planned to be upgraded to Android 8.0, but as far as I know, that update has not happened, and that is a huge problem with most Android manufacturers. Literally, this phone only got like 2 Android versions, and that's it. Even when you compare it to something like a Galaxy S7 that got like 3, and the Google Pixel XLs and all those Google Nexus that got multiple versions of Android, I don't understand why a phone like this cannot get more versions of Android, and that really does suck. But what are you gonna do about it? There is something you can do about it. You can root and custom ROM your phone, but I feel like just as a whole, the whole development community is actually going down, and that does kind of make me sad a little bit. But I'm very optimistic about the future, and if there's less developers, that means phones are getting better. And I really do think after 2016, phones really have started developing like crazy. We've seen smaller bezels, software enhancements, and all that stuff. So at least it has that going for it. Now in terms of the overall performance and specs and kind of talking a little bit further, it has a Qualcomm Snapdragon 820 chipset, a quad-core CPU clocked at 2.15 GHz, an Adreno 530 GPU, and 4 GB of RAM. Now I will say that the overall performance is pretty solid. I'm glad that Motorola doesn't really, add too much bloatware onto the already pre-existing Android software. But since this was a Verizon phone, it did have some bloatware on it, but it's really not that big of a deal. I will say the overall performance was definitely above average. I will say it's like around like 8.5 on the Alpaca score thing, if that's even existing anymore. I've made like 2 videos with it, but yeah, I will say it's like an 8.5. Overall gaming is very, very good as well. I didn't really have too many skipped frames when I'm playing anything like Pew Pew or like Dead Trigger or anything, but Real Racing 3 is also very good, which was super surprising. I expected this phone to kind of lag there because that seems like a game that's either hit or miss on a lot of phones. I think it depends on the GPU a lot. I don't remember what GPU I tested on before, but I don't think it was too solid. But right now it seems like it's pretty good. One thing is that it does kind of get hot a little bit, which isn't that big of a deal. I can get over it. I mean, I'm a strong guy. Hopefully, I've been complimented before about it. So I do think in terms of gaming and performance, yeah, it's good, but the phone does heat up a little bit. But again, it's not that big of a deal to me. Now, flipping to the back and talking about the camera for a second, it actually has a single 21 megapixel camera. It does have optical image stabilization and as well as laser autofocus. It has a dual LED dual tone flash and all those other key features that a lot of other phones have too. And I actually do kind of like it a lot. I think still photos are pretty decent in terms of the lighting. I have pretty decent lighting, I would say. It's not outdoor lighting or anything, but as you can see from the photos, they're not too horrible. And you are able to shoot 4K videos on this thing, and you're able to shoot 1080p videos at 30 frames and 60 frames per second. So that's pretty good. And there's also a 5 megapixel camera as well, and that front camera can shoot 1080p videos at 30 frames per second. So overall, you do have a pretty strong sensor here. I would say video isn't its best point, but single photos and taking photos on the single-handedly, I guess, whatever, is pretty good. But just know there were Moto mods that were created so you can actually get a better camera experience. Would I use it? Probably not. You're just kind of spending even more money on something on a phone that might not be worth it, might be worth it, who knows, but that's just basically my opinion on the camera side of things. Now, in terms of the battery, this was one of those things where I kind of stated like earlier, if you remember this video, if you remember like 10 minutes ago, if you don't remember, then you gotta get your brain checked. But basically I said you should get this phone, the Moto Z Force, over the original Moto Z. They're completely different phones, and the reason being was because of the battery. The Moto Z, I think, had a 2600 mAh battery, but the Moto Z Force has a 3500 mAh battery, and I would definitely say that definitely does improve the overall battery capacity and battery performance, I would say. But it isn't that much better either, because this phone is actually very, very powerful, and I'm not really too sure why, but this phone never really was able to handle the battery that it had, because if you think about it, 3500 milliamp isn't that small of a battery. But for some reason this phone wasn't able to handle it that well. I mean, I would say like it's about like a 70, it's like a 7 out of 10, where it should have easily been like an 8.5 to 9 out of 10. And when you're getting to that level, being very close to 10, I mean, every point you're far away really does add up, especially for a phone of this caliber that was like a flagship at the time. That really does speak mountains. But there were, again, Moto mods where you can increase the battery size, but those really never took off like they should have. So that's basically my viewpoint on the battery life. It's not good, but it's not bad. It's maybe a little bit above average, let's just say. Now, some other notable things to note: this thing does have a fingerprint sensor under the Moto logo on the front, and it's pretty decent. It's not horrible, but I really do think that Motorola could have easily just put like navigation buttons on the actual bezel of the phone rather than having like a nav bar on the screen, because there's just so much bezel on the bottom. It makes absolutely no sense. I don't know why they did that. There's also no headphone jack, which isn't really that big of a deal to me, like I always say, but it might be a big deal to you, so there's really that point into it. So there's only one USB-C type charger on the bottom, which is fairly decent. I mean, USB-C is the future, and considering this phone came out in 2016, really does show that it kind of paved the way a little bit. And another thing to note, and I kind of want to reiterate, this phone pretty much was based off being, modular and having different mods and modifications you can put onto it. And in my opinion, those things never really took off. I have seen tons of them being sold at like Best Buy and stuff, but every time I go there, I see less and less. I don't even think they sell them anymore. They didn't really take off like they should have. And maybe in a lot of ways, this phone was a little bit ahead of its time, But, you know, at this point, I mean, I guess it's kind of early to tell. I mean, it's still like only got released like 2 years ago. So, and one of the best things about this phone is that it does have a micro SD card slot, and that's definitely one of the best things ever. And the reason it's so good is because you can technically get a phone that's like 32 gigabytes and just get like a 256 gigabyte SD card, micro SD card, and throw it in there. Now, I believe this phone is able to handle up to 512 gigabytes of a micro SD card. So if you can get a 512 gigabyte SD card, then go put it in there. But even if you put like 128 or 256 or whatever have you, that's still much better than just having like 32 or 64 gigabytes in your phone. So that's really, really cool and a really nice touch that Motorola put into their phone. So to answer the burning question, is the Motorola Z Force worth it in 2018? I would say it's not a bad option at all. It's really not that expensive. You have a 5.5 inch Quad HD AMOLED screen. You have a pretty decent camera. You have pretty good performance. You do have a modular design, so you can easily go and add more mods or everything like that. Now, I think they're actually much cheaper if you buy them used, which I would really recommend. And the overall build quality isn't that bad. I'm just really not a fan of the front, like I said, but that's personal preference. But if I was being handed this phone or like the equivalent of money for this phone, I would probably take the phone. But if I really had to and I had to use this phone as a daily driver, I would say I would probably enjoy it. I wouldn't hate it. I don't think it's slow or anything like that. The software updates do kind of bug me a little bit, but other than that, if you can get over the software updates, the somewhat above average battery life, and the bezel around the screen, I think it's pretty decent pickup, and I'll just leave it at that, and I think you should get it. Now, there are other phones out there that I do think are kind of in the same price range that are equally as good, if not better. One of them is the Google Pixel XL. I think that phone really is a very good phone for what it is. If you need an equivalent iPhone in kind of the same price range, I would say the iPhone 6s is also pretty decent. But this phone you can't really go wrong with. You cannot go wrong with getting this phone, I would say. And that is pretty much it. I will leave links in the description for you to get the Moto Z Force or Google Pixel XL or an iPhone 6s, so make sure you check out the links in the description. I always find the lowest prices and check them out for you and put them there so you guys don't have to search for them, and you also help out the channel at the same time. So definitely check those out. But that is pretty much it. If you guys have any questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, but definitely hit that subscribe button. We are still giving away an iPhone 6s and an iPhone SE on this channel. And in order to enter, all you have to do is subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Both those links are down in the description, so make sure you guys enter that. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys, and hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.